Hey everybody, welcome to Two Hearts Crochet. My name's Alex and I am your fearful leader for the Marine Life Crochet Along blanket that we're doing here, which you can see I've got here in the background. What I wanted to show you is just a tip that I think that you guys would find useful when joining together your different panels, okay? Learn from my mistakes because I had to take out an entire panel because, as you'll see further in this post, I have pictures of the before and after. The first time I joined all my panels together, some of these strips that I have here didn't line up with each other, right? So they were kind of off-centered and wonky and kind of looked a little something like that when they joined together, which I definitely don't want. The goal is to get those to line up and look nice and tidy. I got really lucky on my first two strips that I made, but this last one here did not join up properly, so I had to tear the whole thing out and I'm going to restitch it together. But I want to give you a tip on how you can keep from doing that yourself. Pretty quick and easy, really easy tip. What we're going to do is we're actually going to use these little locking stitch markers, okay? All I'm going to do, I've got 6 of them here. We've got 3 of these kind of short, they're sideways here, so 3 of these kind of short panels that go in between, or below I should say, below and in between these squares, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this stripe here lines up with this stripe here in my next panel. To do that, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, all right? I'm going to start with the middle one. We've got 3, one here, one on this end, and one on this end over here. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take one stitch marker, and I'm just going to eyeball and see. Now there's a lot of material up here. I might bump the camera, so I apologize. But what I'm going to do is just kind of wiggle this around, see if I can get you to see it, the camera view. I'm just going to eyeball it and see where this stripe lines up with this stripe. It's kind of hard to see in the video how I'm doing this because there's not a lot of space. I'm actually going to move the camera here so you can see, okay? So bear with me. So you can see how I'm just eyeballing it, trying to get these lines, oh, there we go, these lines here to line up. Just eyeballing it, right? It's not rocket science. No one's gonna know but us, right? So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the stitch marker, and once I get it to where I think it lines up pretty close, that looks pretty good, I'm just going to pinch these 2 layers together, right? Just like that. And I'm gonna insert my stitch marker on one side, going through both layers, okay? Just through both layers like that, and I'm going to lock it in place. I'm going to do the same thing for this other side over here. That's why we need 6 stitch markers. We got 2 for each one of these little in-between decorative panels. There we go. And so now that's locked in place, right? And if we move the camera again, you can see that looks pretty closely lined up, all right? Pretty close. I'll set you back down here. So we're gonna do that with all 3 of these. If I scooch this down a little ways, you can see we've got this last bit here that we need to join to this side here, right? So again, I'm just gonna line these up, just an estimate where I think that those line up together. All right, and I think that looks pretty darn close right here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and insert more stitch markers here. And we'll take the stitch markers as we get going stitching, but they're just really there just to give us a rough idea. Once you get it all stitched together, it really is pretty forgiving, so it doesn't have to be exact, right? There we can see, whoops, you can see this one is pretty well lined up too. I kind of scrunched this one up a bit when I stitched it on, but that's okay. All right, so that's 2. We'll do the 3rd one here as well. Lots of material on my desk. Trying not to knock anything over. All right, so here is our last set. And remember, we are stitching this together so that my ridge, my seam, is on the front side of the blanket. So what I want to do is press the wrong sides together when I pin, all right? So again, I just need to make sure that this stripe lines up with this stripe. So I'm just eyeballing it. And I think that looks pretty darn close. So again, just 2 more stitch markers here at the ends. This will also help hold it in place while you're stitching and help. Ultimately, the goal is to make sure it helps line up your panels so that you're stitching evenly. All right? Now you'll notice, I'm going to show you on here in this end here. This will be a little helpful tip for you too. When you're fitting these panels together, right? We did the blanket in 3 stripes, right? So we had one big long rectangle, another big long rectangle, and another big long rectangle. Okay? So what that means is our stitches weren't, exact. It's not perfect, right? It'll work out just fine. But what that means is sometimes you can end up, even though this stripe here and this stripe here, right? You can barely see it. Even though these 2 stripes are lined up pretty close together, that means that our squares are lined up pretty close together. That's exactly what we want. Sometimes though, because it's not an exact science, when we stitch these together, we'll end up with one side of our panel that is longer than the other, right? If we just stretch it out like this here. So it looks like that's a little bit longer on this back piece than it is here. But that's okay. What we're going to basically have to do is just, when we're single crocheting these 2 layers together, we're going to be decreasing along this back side here. Sometimes, depending on whether you have it oriented this way or if you have it oriented this way, right? If you're crocheting the opposite direction, that would mean that the front side would be longer than this back side, right? So you'll either be decreasing along the front or the back, whichever side is the longest, okay? I'm going to show you how to do both of those in this video today. Since I'm right-handed, I'm going to start at the right side of my work, so I'm just going to slide all of this down. Again, there's a lot of material here, so apologies if I bump the camera. If you hear any loud clatters, it's just stuff falling off my desk. All right. So working down here, I've got this all lined up, right? This stripe here is lined up with this stripe down here. And if I pull these up, that looks like these 2 layers, kind of hard to see, but it looks like these 2 layers are pretty evenly spaced, which is good. That means we won't have to do a lot of decreasing, right? We won't have to fiddle with it too much. All right, so I have my yarn here, and this might wind up in a regrettable tangle, but this is my yarn that I pulled out. I know it's the right length because that's what I had on here before I had to frog it. So I'm just going to put a slip knot on there, and to join these panels, I'm just single crocheting these all together, right, through both layers of my work. Starting in the corner, just single crocheting all the way along the top through both layers. And then as I get to the stitch markers, I'll take them off and we'll keep going. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this back on my hook. And we're just going to start single crocheting, right? So we're just crocheting through both layers. I'll go real slow here so you can see I'm going through this layer here and through that layer there. Just single crocheting my way across. Okay? I'm just going to keep doing this for a little ways. What I'd recommend is every, 3 inches or so, until you get really comfortable with this, is step back, take a step back, look at it, and see if the amount of fabric you have on this layer is about the same as the amount of fabric you have on this layer. If you have a bunch, right, like if this is really kind of got extra fabric and this is real tight and straight, that means you'll have more stitches on this side than you will on this side. Or vice versa, right? If this side has a lot of stitches up here, but this side's nice and straight, that means you got more stitches up here than you do down here. That means you're going to have to decrease on whichever side has more stitches left in it, okay? Looking at this here though, this looks pretty even. You can kind of give it a gentle tug, and it looks like there's pretty much the same amount of stitches either way. So every so often as you go, I'd say every few inches that you crochet, maybe just take a step back and reevaluate how much material you have on either side, either layer that you're stitching together. That way you can get a really good feel for it and you won't have to frog some stitches and go back and work some decreases in there. As long as you're paying attention to it, you should be okay. So we're just kind of going along, stitching those two sides together, right? Just like that. So they're nice and joined. But having those stitch markers here is really going to help us stay on track. What I was doing before is I only had a few stitch markers and I did not really put them here, right? What I did was I put one halfway through the blanket, which is about here. And then I had a couple more kind of spaced randomly, just holding the panels together. I wasn't really keeping in mind the fact that I had to line these rows up. So if you go back and you look at my my before picture, you'll be able to see this last panel, this panel on the left-hand side, that last strip, really looked kind of wonky. It didn't line up with the others, right? So I got to say it was just pure dumb luck with the first two panels. I was doing the exact same thing, just kind of had some stitch markers, basically just holding the layers together, not really lining them up properly. I just got really lucky. But that third one, I don't know if I was just crocheting too late in the evening or what, but it did not work out. And I didn't realize it until today. So, you know, pay attention while you're crocheting. Save yourself some trouble. Stitch markers are a lifesaver. I don't use them for a lot of projects, but when I'm stitching blankets together like this, especially these little plastic ones, they really lock in real well and make it real easy to help keep your layers of fabric aligned, right? I'll do this too when I'm using when I'm lining the back of my blanket with fleece. I will use stitch markers to hold the fleece lined up to the blanket so that my stitches are even along that as well. So now you can see we're kind of coming up here on this first stitch marker, and I can see, looking at it, that's pretty well lined up. I'm pleased with where that's at, so I'm going to take the first one out here. I'm just going to keep going all the way to my next stitch marker, just working as I go. Crocheting through both layers of fabric there, right? So if we separate this a little bit, you can see here's one layer, here's the other layer. Just working through both layers. And once we get to that second stitch marker, we'll take it out and we'll reevaluate how many stitches we have on this top layer and how much we have on the bottom. And that'll give us an idea of whether or not we need to do some increasing some decreasing rather. You can increase too on one side, but I found that just decreasing along whichever side is longer, whichever side has the most stitches, is pretty effective. All right, I'm going to take out the second stitch marker. Hold that yarn out a little bit so it doesn't come undone. We're going to reevaluate. So now I'm just going to tuck some of these extra stitches, or these extra tails I have, tuck them inside. I'm going to take a look here. So it looks like, let's see. It looks like I didn't get this quite as lined up as I would like, I think. So what I'm going to do is just going to move this over just a smidge. Again, this is not exact in any way. But that looks a little bit better. It's kind of hard to see from your camera angle, but that looks a little bit better to me. So now I can look and see, do these two layers of fabric look like they have the same amount of stitches or pretty close to it? Am I bunched up anywhere that I shouldn't be, right? Looking here, it does not look like I'm super bunched up in any way. So I'm pretty content with that. So all I'll have to do is just keep crocheting along there. Let me fast forward a little bit. Move some of this down here. We're going to look at the next chunk. Okay? So if we look here, again, I don't think I got these quite lined up as well as I'd hoped. And that's why we use stitch markers, right? Just put that in there. There we go. That looks a little better. Okay, so now looking here at these two layers, it looks like I have a little bit more fabric along this top than I do on the bottom. You can see that because when I give it a little tug to stretch it out, the bottom layer makes a nice line. The top layer has a little bit of a wave to it, okay? So what I'm going to do to decrease on this side, I'm not going to crochet all the way around the blanket here, but I will just pull some yarn down and we'll take a look at it. What you would do is you'd insert your hook through both layers, okay? Grab some yarn. I'm just going to work a couple of stitches here to get us started. One stitch through both layers, okay? All right, so now you can really see this layer here has some extra fabric going on, right? If I take this and pull it straight, you can see we've got a little bit of a bunch on this side. So we need to decrease, I would probably estimate maybe 3 or 4 times, and I'm just going to randomly scatter those decreases in the amount of space we have left, okay? So we'll start by doing one decrease. Again, this is the side that has more stitches, so we're going to be decreasing on this side. So we'll do 1 single crochet on this side per stitch, and this one will be a decrease every few stitches or so, okay? So to do that, I'm going to take my hook and insert it into the next stitch of that front layer, that bottom layer there. I'm going to insert it also into the next stitch of the top layer. I'm going to yarn over and pull my yarn through, just the top layer, right? Then to decrease, I'm going to insert my hook again into the next stitch of that top layer, yarn over, I'm going to pull through the top layer, and I'm going to pull both these 2 loops here on my hook through that bottom layer stitch. All right, so then I've got 3 loops on my hook here. I'll just yarn over and pull through all 3. And basically what that did was we did 1 single crochet on this side and a decrease on this side. What that does is it helps pull that top layer over just a little bit, scrunch it up just a tiny bit so that it lays nice and flat along this seam. Okay, now again, I'm just kind of randomly placing decreases, so I'm just going to do a decrease and then single crochet a few stitches like regular, and I'm going to decrease again, so I'm just decreasing along this back row. All right, pull those through and finish off. And now that you can see that gets a little bit tighter along this side, and that's exactly what we want. All right, now if it was the opposite and this side had more stitches, whatever side was closest to you, what you can do then to decrease, you just insert your hook into that front layer, insert it into the next stitch on the back layer, I'm going to yarn over, pull through the back layer and the front layer. Then I'm going to insert my hook into the next stitch on the front layer, and then I'm going to insert my hook into that same stitch on the back layer, not the next one, but that same one that we just came through. And pull through to the front layer, so you got 3 loops on there, and just finish off that single crochet. And that finishes off your decrease on the front layer. So again, whichever side you're working on, whichever one has more stitches on it, that's the side you'll decrease. So if you're going on the back side, you'll decrease on the back side. If you got more on the front side, you'll decrease on the front side. So hopefully that video helps you a little bit. But again, those stitch markers really do help keep your panels lined up. When we get down here at the end, again, it looks like that's like an inch, right? That's about an inch extra. But yarn is really forgiving, right? So it has some stretch to it. So what I'll do at the end here is I'll probably put another stitch marker down here in my corner. And then I'll have this extra fabric along the top here. I'd say this is probably going to be about 7 or maybe even 8 decreases depending on tension and whatnot. But I'll just kind of decrease along this back layer. What I can also do too is put stitch marker in the corner. I could put another stitch marker kind of halfway between those two stitch markers, and I can put it so that I've got the same amount of extra fabric on each side of my middle stitch marker. And that'll kind of help me visualize where I need to place my decreases on that back layer so that it looks pretty even. All right. Hopefully that video helps, and again, you can kind of compare the before and after with those photos that are in this blog post for assembling your Marine Life Cal blanket pieces. But I hope you're enjoying the crochet along project, and of course the next step is lining with fabric, which is super exciting. So happy crafting, and I'll see you guys another time. Bye!